we've talked about the AM show quite a bit on this show. We're going to come up to our 100th episode Monday week. That's when our 100th episode is going to be on. But the one of the things we've often talked about, and maybe there's a little bit of bitterness from me in this, if I'm completely honest, is that these people who have access to the politicians that I'd love to talk to waste so much of their fucking time asking inane and stupid questions that they either know the answers to or are pointless. In this conversation, they're talking about the so-called health crisis. You can see the heading there. Why Andrew Little won't say New Zealand health system is in a crisis. Ryan Bridge spends half the interview trying to get Andrew Little to say the word crisis. He actually, that's the first half of the conversation is just about that. In fact, I will play the quote for you. And there is a point where he says this, Ryan Bridge says this, I don't want to get caught up. I don't want to get too caught up in is it a crisis or isn't it a crisis? So in other words, the substance of the conversation, i.e. is there a crisis, Ryan Bridge doesn't want to talk about. He literally says, again, I don't want to get too caught up in is it a crisis, isn't it a crisis? So he doesn't want to talk about the actual potential issue. He just wants Andrew Little to say the word crisis. And he's perturbed that he won't say the word crisis. So I'm going to play for you a few questions from Ryan Bridge, and then we're going to play some of the answers from Andrew Little, and then we're going to go on and talk about what's actually happening in nursing at the moment. So here's the first question from Ryan Bridge. Just really wanting, apart from anything else, really wanting Andrew Little to say the word crisis to all of the people that want him to say it.
I'm sort of on your side in some ways. I don't want to get too caught up in the is it a crisis, isn't a crisis. But clearly there are a great number of people within the profession, healthcare, who want you to just acknowledge it, to just say that it is. Will you do that this morning?
So all these people just want him to say it. Now, for me, if there is a crisis, what I want my government to do is fucking solve it. I don't want them just to say it. But apparently the thing that's most important to Ryan Bridge is to get this minister that he's got the time with on the air to say the word crisis. Any response from you guys? You can jump in now if you want.
One thing that jumped into mind is how much National got lashed over the housing crisis, and how long John Key fought against saying there's no housing crisis. There's no housing crisis. So I see a little bit of that in this. And now we're on to two crises. It's a cost of living crisis and the nursing crisis. So we've got two of them on the go now.
Yep. Well, I mean, we get to that actually. One of the points that so Ryan Bridge basically makes 3 points in the first half of this interview. He first says, "Are you going to say it?" He then asks him, which is the next clip, "Can you please define what a crisis is?" He then spends his third credit saying, "Well, you used to say the word crisis, now you won't say it." And as I said, I would rather hear from the government how they were going to solve the crisis issue, whatever it is, rather than spending so much time trying to get a minister to say the word, because you know what they're trying to do. If you don't know, I'm telling you, what they're trying to do is to be able to have the headline, Andrew Little finally admits there's a crisis. That will get them clicks. That will improve their advertising. That will be a so-called exclusive because he said a 6-letter word before anyone else said it. Whereas Andrew Little in this conversation, and actually we'll play a bit of it as we go, is actually talking about addressing the issues in the health system that all these media groups and stuff are calling a crisis. Now, I'm not actually saying it's not a crisis, right? I'm just saying that, I mean, you've heard it from Ryan Bridge himself. I'll say it again. I don't want to get too caught up in is it a crisis, isn't it a crisis? So Ryan Bridge doesn't want to have a conversation around are we actually in a crisis, what's going on. He just wants him to say the word crisis. The second clip I've got for you is Ryan Bridge talking again, and don't panic, we're not just picking on Ryan Bridge, we're going to play some stuff from Andrew Little as well. But he wants him to define what a crisis is.
The health system.
And yet we find ourselves in this situation still. So I guess the next question is, what is a crisis? When would you use the term? What would it take?
Can you please just say the word crisis? Won't anyone think of the crisis?
Or can you trip sideways into defining this as a crisis without saying it?
Now, there's a little bit that comes up now, Chewy, which is something that you kind of just alluded to a little bit. The next point is Ryan Bridge really talking about you used to use the word crisis. You used to say when national. So what he's implying is when national was in government, used to be happy to use the word crisis. Now not using it. That might be a fair criticism. I'm completely on board with that. Let's say that's fair, no question whatsoever. However, what Andrew Little does after that is actually answers why they use the word crisis there and what they've done to start to address a systemic problem in the health system. Now, when we get to talk to the New Zealand Nursing Society, you'll hear, because I asked the director that question, like I asked that director, if these so-called 600 anti-vax nurses were actually put straight into the field tomorrow, would that make a difference? And he says no, because this is a problem that's going back multiple years, multiple governments for a very, very, very long time. Right. So we'll play this bit now, which is another question about the word crisis. And then we'll let Minister Little answer it as well. And his answer is talking about why, I guess, the word crisis has now been gone from his vernacular. I don't know. Maybe he's had a small stroke and he can't physically say it for whatever reason. But we'll see what he's got to say about it.
The thing about it is, so, I mean, your argument is that, you've got to be careful with your language and, people throw the word crisis around all the time, right? I guess the issue that those on the front line have is that it's a word that you've used many times before. When you were in opposition and National was in government, you said there was a homelessness crisis.
I'm not quite sure where that gets this discussion for the health system.
You also said there was a housing crisis.
So those frontline health workers who I met when I get out of the hospital,
Minister, if I
they
can just
tell me
finish.
the experiences they're having.
Yeah, Minister, if I can just finish. You said there was a housing crisis. You also said there was a mental health system in crisis. You also said that children's mental health was in crisis. So it was okay to use the word then. What's changed now other than the fact you're in power?
Fair question. We will agree it's a fair question. But
what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
Yeah, no, fair question. But the response is what's mostly important. Like I said at the start, for me, it's not about the word crisis. It's about solving whatever the issue is. Whether you call it a crisis or call it an issue or call it a massive shortfall, whatever it is, to have a minister there and just asking about the word crisis rather than how they're going to solve the issues, just gets my goat something. So here's the response to talk about that. So this is the minister now talking about why they use the word crisis. And you can judge for yourself whether you think it's a fair response or whether he's being this is double speak from a politician. That's up to you.
I can explain the mental health crisis because there was a rapid increase in the number of people reporting mental health issues, and the government at the time that did absolutely nothing about it, had not added anything to it, had not even undertaken to examine the extent and nature of the problem. We've done that, and we've made a big investment, and we've added over 900 people to the front line in terms of mental health services. We've got another $100 million in this year's budget that we've put into acute mental health services. We have addressed that issue. When it comes to the broader health system and the challenges in the hospitals at the moment, we've added 5,500 doctors and nurses over the last 5 years. We've put in billions of extra dollars every year into the system to address the gaps and the issues that are there and the shortcomings that are there. There are still challenges. There are still problems.
Let's talk about
a health
those.
system.
Yeah, let's talk about
the
those
reason
challenges.
we changed the health system is because we had a system that was simply incapable of managing the chronic problems in the system.
Absolutely.
That's why we changed the structure. We now have a system that's better placed to address that.
Okay,
So there you go. You boys want to comment? Was that?
He really didn't want to let him finish that piece, did he?
Well, I like it as well. I don't know if it's a stylistic thing from Ryan Bridge, but the minister's making, I don't know whether they're good points or bad points or accurate points. Again, you can decide that for yourself. But he's making point, which is kind of contrary to what Ryan's saying. And while he's saying them, Ryan's going, yes, it is, like agreeing with him. It's a bizarre style of doing it. But there's a point counterpoint. What do you think, Joey?
I think that was a good answer from Andrew Little, actually. Considering he really didn't want to answer it, it was a good pivot that he had a chance to say, hey, look, this is what our government done with the mental health crisis. And, there's still other challenges. I think it was a good answer.
Let's have a look at the very last question now, shall we? The very last question, which then is going to lead us into the interview with the New Zealand Nursing Society. And it's talking about, let's be blunt, anti-vaxxer nurses.
One final issue, and this is an issue that we get contacted about a lot here on the program, and one that Christopher Lux has now waded into this morning. Have you asked for advice, or have you asked Aisha Verrill to lift the mandates on health workers so that we can have by their estimates, the 500 to 700 nurses and healthcare workers who are currently not working in New Zealand because of the mandates, the vaccine mandates, back into work?
I know that Dr. Verrill has those things under constant review, so she is responsible for that, except to say that those mandates were put in place for the safety of both staff and patients, and at a time when COVID infections are rising and the number of COVID cases going to hospital are rising quite rapidly now, we still have to make sure that everything we can do to keep people safe and keep infection prevention and control appropriately managed in hospitals is very important.
Done. Chewy, anything? I want to add something to this, but you guys can jump in first if you want to have any thoughts. That's the end of the clips from Andrew Little and News Hub.
Look, just as we've been talking, I've actually been chatting to my sister, who's a nurse, because I figured it's one thing to sit here and go, well, I don't think so, but I'm not a nurse. I don't have to work in that environment, so I know without probably saying too much, my sister waited until the last minute to get vaccinated. She had some health questions around it that I would consider legitimate. She bit the bullet and got the vax. But I reached out to her and says, you're a person on the front line. What do you think? And I'm just going to read what she said to me. At this point, it doesn't matter to me anymore. The majority are vaccinated, and at the end of the day, they're just putting themselves at more risk. We are in dire need of more staff. We can't afford to be picky anymore. But I think there should be a point. Unvaccinated nursing staff shouldn't work with the most vulnerable population. Everybody's just so tired, and we need more hands. and I felt that comment. When someone writes a comment and you're just like, you can feel the weight of what they're writing. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's a danger in lumping everybody in the same bucket, I guess, that there's some bad actors around being anti-vax and voices for freedom and all of that sort of stuff. And there may have been people that had legitimate fears. It probably doesn't do us much to paint them all with the same brush, but yeah, I'd certainly personally, I would have concerns about a nurse that was coming back to work after being stood down for that. Like, what else doesn't she believe in?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the points
that sort of thing.
Yeah. Hey, before we do that, guys, not that it matters too much because we're about to come off, but there's a banging coming through. Someone's on their table or something's going on. I don't know where it's coming from, but it's coming from somewhere. Just if one of you guys has a vibrating thing going on, or a vibrating thing.
I'm leaning on my desk, so probably.
I want to say two things, and this is really bad broadcasting practice, but I'm going to divulge two things that come up in the next interview because I want people to hear them in case you leave. I know you probably won't, but I want people to leave them, and they're based around what's just been said. Ryan Bridge talked about the 500 to 700 nurses sitting on the sideline. Well, the nursing union we're about to speak to, they've done a bit of a deep dive into it, and there might be 500 to 700 people, but many of them aren't registered nurses, or they're former nurses, or they're not people who are necessarily in the nursing organizations. They're not actually all registered, ready to go back to work nurses. That's the first thing to be aware of. So you hear that number that the group who are unvaccinated are bandying about. You'll hear it in this upcoming interview. Those who are in the system and have looked at who are the people in that group are questioning how many of them actually are and could be nurses coming back. And the second thing is, this is a really important thing because to me, this kind of negates the whole conversation. And it's coming up in the interview and it's like I'm spoiling it, but so be it, because I think it's important. I want everyone to hear it. Is that we talk, well, I hear from the director about the contracts that these nurses have. In the contracts, they need to be vaccinated, which means when the mandates go away, that doesn't mean they walk straight back into a job. They probably still have to be vaccinated without the mandate or not.